beneath the fading grandeur of Ashbourne Manor, where ivy curled along the weathered stone and time seemed to linger in dusty corridors, a young gentlewoman lived as though half forgotten. Eleanor Harcourt, daughter of the late Sir Thomas, bore her beauty with a quiet dignity, though no audience remained to witness it. Her stepmother, Lady Margaret, had long since ensured that Eleanor's presence in society was little more than a rumour, a shadow that never materialized at assemblies or balls. The girl's life was confined within the estate walls, her world reduced to the library's faded volumes, the echo of her own footsteps on marble floors, and the weight of a future she had not chosen. Lady Margaret, ambitious and cold, had deemed her too unpolished, too provincial, and had withheld her from a London season, promising always that the proper time had not yet arrived. In truth, Eleanor was a pawn, reserved for some advantageous bargain that might one day increase her stepmother's influence. On a summer afternoon, the manor's gardens stirred with unusual preparation. Lady Margaret had invited a handful of local gentry to tea, a calculated gesture to reinforce her own standing as the mistress of Ashbourne. The lawns were dressed with tables of gleaming china, lace-draped parasols offered shade, and the air held the fragrance of roses, sweet but cloying. Eleanor, though reluctant, had been commanded to attend, not as a daughter to be admired, but as a silent ornament to stand at her stepmother's side. She wore a gown that had once belonged to her late mother, its silk slightly faded, its cut unfashionable by current standards. To her it was a treasure, to others it whispered neglect. Guests assembled, their chatter rising in delicate waves. Lady Margaret's voice cut crisply through the afternoon, directing servants and offering compliments where they might be repaid in kind. Eleanor, seated near the edge of the gathering, sipped tea in silence. Her thoughts wandered to the books she might have read had she been permitted to remain indoors, yet she forced her hands to remain steady, her smile faint but polite. She was aware, always, of the eyes upon her, curious, measuring, unkind. It was Mrs. Fairchild, plump and prone to gossip, who first let slip a remark that pierced deeper than the sun's heat. How strange, she mused, her fan fluttering as though to soften her words, that such a pretty girl should never have been seen in town. One would almost suspect her to be a recluse. Laughter followed, gentle on the surface yet sharp beneath, as though each chuckle pressed Eleanor further into invisibility. Another guest, a young gentleman with little tact, leaned closer to remark that perhaps she had been hidden away for good reason, that her manners might not withstand the scrutiny of a London ballroom. Eleanor's cheeks flushed. She lowered her gaze to the porcelain cup trembling in her grasp. The tea spilled, a pale stain blooming across the tablecloth, and her stepmother's disapproving glance struck harder than any spoken rebuke. Lady Margaret's lips tightened. Her silence was eloquent. Shame, heavy and suffocating, pressed against Eleanor's chest. She excused herself, her voice scarcely audible, and withdrew from the assembly. The garden stretched before her, vast and verdant, its paths winding through rose bushes and shaded bowers. She moved quickly, her slippers brushing the gravel, her heart racing with humiliation. Behind her, the laughter of the guests continued, muffled now by distance, yet still haunting. She longed for escape, for air untainted by mockery, and so she passed beyond the familiar borders of the terrace into the wilder edges of the estate where her stepmother seldom ventured. The sunlight softened beneath the canopy of trees, bird-song replaced the clinking of china, and at last she breathed freely. She paused beside a fountain, its waters cool and clear, and pressed her palms against the stone. In her solitude, the tears she had restrained at the table threatened to fall, yet she held them back with fierce resolve. To weep would be to grant power to those cruel whispers. She told herself she was not diminished, that her worth was not measured in seasons or gowns or the opinions of women who saw only what could be bartered. And yet, she could not wholly silence the ache of longing. To be seen, truly seen, as her father had once seen her, with pride and tenderness, seemed now an impossible dream. The hour waned, shadows lengthened, and Eleanor wandered further than she had in years. Past the trimmed hedges, past the iron gates that marked the estate's boundary, she found herself in a stretch of garden where wild roses grew unchecked, their fragrance heady, their thorns eager to catch at her skirts. She lingered there, listening to the hush of leaves stirred by a warm breeze, when suddenly the distant rhythm of hooves broke the stillness. She turned. Along the road beyond the gate a carriage approached, its wheels crunching upon gravel, its polished wood gleaming in the sun. It was not the vehicle of a neighboring family, nor one she recognized. She stood uncertain, her figure framed by roses, her breath caught between fear and fascination. The carriage slowed, then halted. From within, a man stepped down, tall and broad-shouldered, his bearing unmistakably noble. His hair, dark as raven's wing, was touched with a silver sheen at the temples, and his eyes, keen, observant, fixed upon her with an intensity that made the air itself seem charged. He was dressed with the restraint of a gentleman of rank, yet there was something in his gaze that betrayed neither calculation nor politeness, but something far more unsettling, astonishment. Eleanor's heart thudded. She knew, instinctively, that she ought to retreat, to lower her eyes and vanish before propriety demanded explanation. Yet she remained, rooted as if the earth itself conspired to hold her there. The stranger advanced a step, not with arrogance, but with a reverence that belied his station. In that suspended moment, the shame that had driven her from the tea-table seemed distant, almost unreal. Here was a man whose eyes did not measure her value against fashion or fortune. His gaze carried recognition, though they had never met, as though in her he had discovered something he had long sought. "Forgive me," he said at last, his voice deep, resonant, carrying across the roses with a gravity that stirred her breath. "I had not thought to intrude. Yet to pass by and not speak would be to deny what my heart has already proclaimed." Eleanor blinked, uncomprehending, as though language itself had failed her. The stranger paused, then, with a fervor that startled even himself, declared words that shattered every unspoken rule of aristocratic decorum. "Will you marry me?" The silence that followed was immense, the world itself seeming to draw a breath. Eleanor's lips parted, though no reply emerged. Her mind raced, shame, disbelief, wonder colliding in equal measure. Before her stood a man who defied reason, who risked scandal for the sake of a moment's conviction. And yet, in that moment, the memory of her stepmother's scorn, the laughter of the guests, the weight of years spent hidden, all of it paled before the audacity of his question. The garden seemed suddenly vast, the sky vast still, and the world she had known too small to contain what had just begun. The roses trembled in the breeze as Eleanor stared at the stranger before her, scarcely able to believe her ears. His words, rash, unfathomable, and utterly improper, seemed to echo through the quiet air. "Will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, she stood motionless, her lips parted, the memory of cruel laughter still burning within her, the sting of humiliation clinging to her skin. And yet, here was a man of evident rank and command, his countenance earnest, his voice steady with conviction, proposing something that belonged to the realm of dreams, not to the rigid world in which she had been caged. Her first impulse was retreat. She stepped back, her gown catching on the thorned branches of the wild roses, as though the garden itself conspired to hold her within this moment. "Sir," she whispered, her voice unsteady but touched with dignity, "you cannot, such a thing is beyond all reason." The stranger regarded her, his expression unreadable, though his eyes carried something she had never encountered before, not condescension, not calculation, but recognition, as if her very soul had been unveiled to him in an instant. He bowed slightly, a gesture that combined apology with an unspoken insistence. "Perhaps it is madness," he said, "but if so, it is the first madness that has given me life since grief claimed me." His words were weighted with sorrow, though she could not yet grasp its depth. The sound of carriage wheels turning upon gravel recalled her to reality. Beyond the gates, his coachman shifted in uneasy silence, no doubt astonished at the delay. Eleanor clutched her hands together, searching for words to close the distance between them and restore order. "I cannot answer you," she said hurriedly. "I cannot even know you. It would be ruin for us both." The stranger's gaze softened, as though her protest only confirmed his resolve. His hand moved slightly, and it was then he noticed the glove that had slipped from her grasp when she fled the tea-table earlier. Pale against the dark earth, it seemed a symbol of the world she had just abandoned: shame, ridicule, invisibility. He bent, retrieved it with a certain gravity, and held it lightly between his fingers. "Then let this be my pledge," he said. "I shall keep what you have dropped, and I shall return it only when you allow me to see you again. Consider it not a command, but a plea." Her breath caught. The glove, an object so simple, so ordinary, suddenly felt like a token charged with consequence. "You must not," she began, but the words faltered, for he had already bowed once more, replaced his hat, and with a final look that seemed to carve itself into her memory, he returned to his carriage. The wheels turned, the sound receded, and Eleanor was left amidst the roses, her heart pounding, her glove absent, and her world irrevocably altered. When at last she returned to the manor, dusk had begun to descend. The tea guests had departed, but whispers lingered like perfume in the halls. Servants, though discreet, could not contain their curiosity. Two maids passed her in the corridor with sidelong glances, their whispers breaking into stifled giggles. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheek. She knew that secrecy within a household was as fragile as glass, and the sight of a carriage halting at the gate would not have gone unnoticed. Lady Margaret awaited her in the drawing-room, seated before the fire with an air of cultivated calm that Eleanor knew too well concealed simmering suspicion. "You were absent long, my dear," she remarked coolly, lifting her teacup with elegant precision. "I trust the gardens proved more soothing company than our guests?" Eleanor curtsied, her eyes lowered. "I needed air, madam. I meant no discourtesy." "Discourtesy?" Lady Margaret's tone sharpened slightly, though her smile remained. "You mean humiliation. I heard what they said, and I saw your clumsy display. One cannot vanish from society for years and expect admiration when one finally stumbles into its view." She set her cup down with a deliberate clink. "But I warn you, Eleanor, if you bring scandal upon this house, if even a whisper reaches town that you conducted yourself with impropriety—" She paused, her eyes narrowing. "You will find your position here most uncomfortable." Eleanor's lips pressed together. The words she longed to speak, to defend herself, to cry out against her stepmother's cruelty, remained imprisoned. Silence was her shield, though it chafed like a chain. She murmured only, "Yes, madam," and withdrew before her composure could shatter. That night, as she lay sleepless, the memory of the stranger's voice returned again and again, each repetition fusing shame with wonder. His audacity was beyond belief, yet within it lay a truth she could not deny. In his eyes she had not been invisible. She had been seen, and the glove, that foolish, trifling object, now bound her to a promise she neither invited nor wholly resisted. The following morning the household buzzed with rumors. A footman had seen the Duke of Wexford's crest upon the halted carriage. By afternoon the name rippled through the servants' hall like wildfire. The Duke, widowed, wealthy, powerful, had paused at Ashbourne's gates. Speculation flowered. What business had he there, and why had he delayed? Lady Margaret's inquiries grew sharper, her temper shorter. Eleanor moved through the day like a figure in a play, all eyes upon her, her every step weighed for meaning. By evening, a guest arrived unannounced, a neighbor, Mrs. Fairchild, brimming with curiosity. She leaned close to Lady Margaret in the parlor, her voice falsely hushed yet pitched to carry. "My maid swears it was the Duke himself, waiting at your gate. Tell me, Lady Margaret, is it true? What business had such a man here?" Eleanor, seated quietly at the edge of the room, felt her blood chill. She sensed her stepmother's gaze upon her, sharp as a blade. Lady Margaret smiled thinly. "Idle chatter, Mrs. Fairchild. The Duke had no business here. My stepdaughter is hardly the sort to attract such notice." The dismissal might have ended the matter, yet Eleanor saw how her stepmother's fingers tightened on the arm of her chair, how suspicion glimmered like firelight in her eyes. She knew that the truth, fragile, dangerous, teetered on the brink of discovery. When at last she was excused, Eleanor fled once more to the solitude of her chamber. There, in the darkness, she pressed her hand to her heart and whispered to the silence what she dared not say aloud, that for the first time in years she longed for more than survival, more than endurance. She longed to step beyond the gates not as a shadow, but as herself. And somewhere, beyond the walls that imprisoned her, the Duke of Wexford held her glove, waiting. Rain fell softly upon the gardens of Ashbourne 2 nights later, a steady whisper upon leaves and stone. The world beyond the manor walls seemed hushed, as though holding its breath. Eleanor had scarcely slept in those intervening days. The memory of the Duke's bold question pursued her even in dreams, until she could not distinguish where reality ended and imagination began. Whispers of his halted carriage still rippled through the household, though no one dared mention them in her presence. Lady Margaret's watchful eyes seemed always to linger longer upon her now, as if probing for confession. Yet Eleanor bore her silence as best she could, retreating to her chamber or the library whenever opportunity allowed. And still, she felt the glove missing from her possession, as though its absence marked her with a secret "no, I could miss." It was on that rain-drenched evening that word arrived. One of the estate's stewards, a trusted servant of her late father, slipped a note into her hand as she lingered near the library hearth. His eyes avoided hers, but the gesture was deliberate. She unfolded the small square of parchment with trembling fingers. The writing was precise yet urgent. Asterisk at the fountain by the eastern garden wall, at the toll of 9. I beg you grant me but a moment. Asterisk no name was signed, yet she needed none. Her heart recognized its author before her mind could speak the truth. The clock struck, each chime thrumming in her chest, as she stole from the house beneath a cloak. The corridors stretched endlessly, each shadow threatening discovery, but fortune favored her, for Lady Margaret entertained company in the drawing-room and the servants were occupied with their duties. Eleanor reached the garden unseen. Rain glistened on roses, turned gravel paths to silver, and softened the night with its gentle insistence. There, by the fountain where once she had wept alone, stood the Duke of Wexford. He removed his hat at her approach, bowing low with a solemnity that acknowledged the peril of their meeting. His face, illuminated by the lantern he had set upon the stone, was more grave than she recalled, and yet when his eyes met hers, there was a warmth that defied the chill rain. "Forgive the boldness of my request," he said quietly, his voice carrying above the patter of water. "I could not leave matters thus. You have haunted my thoughts, Eleanor Harcourt, as though fate itself conspired that I should not know peace until I had spoken plainly." Her breath caught at the sound of her name in his mouth. No one had spoken it with such reverence in years. She drew her cloak tighter, as if to guard her trembling. "My lord," she replied, "this meeting is dangerous. Were we discovered, the scandal would ruin us both. And yet here you are," he answered gently, with no reproach, only recognition. "Which tells me you, too, feel what I feel, that life offers few moments worth seizing, and fewer still that might alter its course entirely. I am a widower, Miss Harcourt. The halls of Wexford House have known silence since my wife was laid to rest. I have stood in Parliament, spoken with authority, commanded respect, and yet none of it has lessened the emptiness of my heart. Until I saw you, I had resigned myself to a life of duty without joy. But you—" his words faltered, the sincerity of them pulling him into silence for a moment before he steadied. "You have reminded me what it is to feel alive." Eleanor's eyes stung, not with shame but with a bittersweet yearning. No man had ever spoken to her thus. She lowered her gaze, the rain mingling with the warmth that escaped her eyes at last. "I am no one," she whispered. A girl hidden away, unpresented, unvalued. My stepmother keeps me in shadows, for reasons I scarcely understand. I cannot match your station, nor withstand the gaze of society's censure. You speak of fate, but fate has never been kind to me. The Duke stepped closer, careful, as though one misstep might send her fleeing. His voice softened to an intimacy that seemed to fold the night around them. You are not no one. You are the very thing society fears, a woman unshaped by its cruel designs. Do not mistake obscurity for unworthiness. It is precisely because you have not been paraded before every hungry suitor that you are unlike any I have known. And if society whispers, let it whisper. Their tongues have no dominion over my heart. The lantern's light flickered, casting shadows across his face, and Eleanor felt herself drawn into the space between them, where restraint warred with yearning. She lifted her chin, her voice firmer now. And if Lady Margaret learns of this, if she twists it to her purpose, or spreads falsehoods in the name of ambition, then I shall stand before her openly, he said without hesitation, and declare my intentions. I would rather face her wrath than endure another day of silence. But I must know, Eleanor, do you despise me for my forwardness? Do you wish me gone? Her lips parted, but no denial came. Instead, she met his gaze, her voice scarcely more than a breath. I do not wish you gone. The confession, small though it seemed, struck the air like thunder. He exhaled, as though released from a torment long held. From within his coat, he drew a sealed letter, its wax glistening red in the lamplight. Then keep this, he said. Read it when you are alone. In it are words I cannot yet trust myself to speak without consequence. It is yours, to open or to destroy, but know that every word within is true. Her fingers brushed his as she accepted the letter, and the contact lingered longer than propriety allowed. In that moment every raindrop seemed to pause, every shadow to recede, as though the world itself conspired to grant them this fragile intimacy. Yet the spell was swiftly broken, for the sound of footsteps echoed faintly from the path beyond. Lanterns bobbed in the distance, servants, perhaps, or worse, her stepmother's spies. Eleanor's heart lurched. She tucked the letter swiftly beneath her cloak, her eyes wide with alarm. We must part, she whispered urgently. The Duke's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He caught her hand once more, pressing the damp glove he had carried these past days into her palm. Then take it back, he said, his voice firm with promise. I return it not as an end, but as a beginning. And before she could reply, he stepped back into the shadows, reclaiming his lantern, his figure swallowed by the rain-slicked night. Eleanor stood trembling, the letter concealed against her breast, her glove once more in her hand. The footsteps grew nearer. She fled silently toward the house, her cloak streaming behind her like a banner of secrecy. When she slipped back into her chamber, breathless and soaked, she leaned against the door, her heart pounding with the weight of all that had passed. In her hand lay both glove and letter, tokens of a future she could scarcely imagine, yet could no longer deny. And though fear coiled within her, it was laced with something perilously close to hope. The rain drummed steadily against the window-panes, as though urging her onward, whispering that her life was no longer her stepmother's to command, but hers to claim, if only she dared. The morning after her clandestine meeting, Eleanor awoke with the letter still pressed against her heart, its wax seal intact though her fingers had traced it through the night until she nearly knew the crest by memory. Dawn crept through the curtains, pale and hesitant, as though uncertain whether to reveal a new day or preserve the fragile dream that had carried her through her restless sleep. She sat up, the sound of the rain's retreat lingering in her mind, and for a long while she simply held the letter, torn between dread of what it might contain and longing for the words within. At last, unable to resist, she broke the seal. The Duke's hand was bold, deliberate, his words arranged with both care and urgency. He spoke of his solitude since the death of his wife, of the weight of expectation that pressed upon him, of duty fulfilled yet hollow. He confessed the suddenness of his attachment to her, acknowledging the impropriety of it, yet insisting it was no mere folly of impulse. "What I saw in you," he wrote, "was not a face or form alone, though both struck me with beauty. It was something deeper, something unguarded, as though fate had unveiled you to me in truth. I cannot forget it, nor do I wish to. If you will but permit, I shall return, not as a shadow in your garden, but as a man who speaks his intentions openly, before all the world if need be." Eleanor folded the letter with trembling hands, her chest tight with emotions she could not name. The words filled her with warmth, yet they also sharpened her fear. He had written not with idle charm but with resolve, and she knew resolve such as his would not remain concealed. Already whispers stirred in the household. Lady Margaret's sharp glances grew more frequent, her questions more pointed. It was only a matter of time before suspicion became accusation. At breakfast, the tension manifested itself. Lady Margaret's spoon tapped against her cup with a deliberate rhythm, her gaze fixed upon Eleanor as though awaiting confession. "You appear restless this morning, child," she observed. "Have you taken ill?" Eleanor forced her features into composure, though her pulse quickened. "No, madam. I am well." "Well," Lady Margaret echoed, her lips curving faintly though her eyes remained cold. "That is fortunate, for we shall soon be occupied. Word has reached me that the Duke of Wexford is to visit this county on matters of estate. It would not do for my household to appear disordered when a man of his standing may call upon us. Do you comprehend, Eleanor?" The spoon struck against porcelain once more, sharp as a blade. Eleanor murmured assent, though her heart roared within her. So soon, then? He meant to act swiftly. She excused herself with measured grace, but once beyond her stepmother's sight, she pressed a hand to the wall for steadiness. The Duke's words had been no empty vow. He was coming. That afternoon, unable to endure the confines of the manor, Eleanor retreated to the library, her sanctuary since childhood. She pulled volumes from shelves, not for their content but for their comfort, the scent of paper and ink steadying her thoughts. Yet even among her father's books, she could not escape the tumult that raged within. What did she truly desire? Freedom, certainly. To escape the suffocating disdain of Lady Margaret. Yet freedom was no simple flight. It came at cost, at risk. Marriage to the Duke would place her not in obscurity, but at the very heart of scrutiny. Could she withstand it? Her deliberations were interrupted by the arrival of a visitor. The steward, Mr. Hale, a man who had once served her father with unwavering loyalty, entered quietly. He bowed, his lined face grave. "Miss Harcourt, I would not intrude were it not of import. A letter has come, borne by a messenger in the Duke's livery. I deemed it best to deliver it directly, lest others intercept." Eleanor's breath caught. She accepted the folded parchment, her hands unsteady. The seal confirmed what Hale had said. It bore the crest she already knew. She thanked him softly, and when he withdrew, she broke the wax at once. The message was brief, urgent. This evening, I ride to Ashbourne under pretense of estate matters. If you are willing, grant me but a moment in the garden once more. If not, I shall depart without pressing you further. Yet I cannot remain silent when my heart demands to speak plainly. Her decision was both swift and torturous. She longed to see him again, yet fear coiled tighter with each passing thought. Lady Margaret's vigilance was unrelenting. Discovery would bring not only her stepmother's wrath, but ruin to her name. And yet, to deny him entirely seemed to her as unbearable as the life she had endured these many years. As twilight descended, Eleanor found herself once more at the fountain, her cloak drawn close, her heart thundering. The air was heavy with anticipation, every sound amplified, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the crunch of approaching hooves upon gravel. And then he was there, dismounting swiftly, his figure tall and commanding even in the dim light. "Eleanor," he breathed, as though her name itself was a benediction. He stepped nearer, his eyes searching hers for doubt. I come not to entrap you nor to endanger you. I come to speak openly. I will stand before your stepmother, before society, before Parliament itself if I must, and declare my wish to make you my wife. But I cannot move without your consent. Tell me truly, do you wish this?" Her heart wavered between terror and elation. She saw in him no artifice, no scheme, only the raw earnestness of a man who had stripped himself of every shield save truth. Tears blurred her vision, yet her voice emerged steady. "I do not know if I have the strength," she whispered. "But I know I cannot bear to lose the chance." The Duke's hand found hers, enclosing it with firm warmth. "Then let us face it together. Whatever storm follows, we shall weather it." For a long moment they stood thus, bound not by words alone but by a silent vow forged in the dark garden. The night itself seemed to hush, as though consecrating their union. Yet even as hope surged within her, Eleanor felt the chill of foreboding. For in the distance, beyond the shelter of roses, a shadow stirred. The faint glimmer of a lantern moved where no lantern ought, and the echo of a footstep broke the fragile stillness. Eleanor's breath caught. The Duke turned, his posture shifting with sudden alertness. Whoever approached, they had not come by accident. The secret they had so carefully guarded was now at the brink of discovery. And in that instant, Eleanor knew their path forward would not remain hidden much longer. The lantern's glow wavered in the night, cutting across the damp garden like a blade of fire. Eleanor froze where she stood, her hand still clasped in the Duke's, her breath shallow with dread. The air thickened with the weight of discovery, and in that moment every secret, every whispered promise, seemed to hang precariously between revelation and ruin. The Duke straightened, his shoulders squared, his expression shifting into one of calm defiance, yet his hand never released hers. Whoever approached, he would not allow her to stand alone. From the shadows emerged Lady Margaret, her figure tall and rigid beneath a cloak, her lantern held high to illuminate the fountain. The flame cast cruel lines across her face, sharpening her eyes into slits of suspicion and triumph. "So," she said, her voice low yet edged with satisfaction, "my instincts were not mistaken. I thought the whispers too fanciful, yet here you are, Eleanor, caught in clandestine company, betraying every rule of propriety." Eleanor's heart thundered painfully against her ribs. Words rose to her lips and died, for she knew any defense would sound like guilt. She felt the Duke's grip steady her trembling, but his gaze never faltered as he addressed her stepmother with grave courtesy. "Lady Margaret, I beg you not to misconstrue. There is no betrayal here, no shameful act. I came to speak to Miss Harcourt openly, for she has stirred in me a devotion I cannot silence. I would court her honorably, before the eyes of the world, if she will permit it." Lady Margaret's laughter was sharp, brittle, carrying no mirth. "Court her? Honorably? Do you take me for a fool, your Grace? A man of your consequence skulking in gardens at night, whispering promises to a girl who has no dowry, no name worth the ink with which it is written. Do not insult me with noble pretenses. I see plainly enough what is at play." Her words struck Eleanor like stones, but the Duke's voice rose above them, firm as steel. "You mistake me, madam. I am not a man who hides behind falsehoods. What I feel for your stepdaughter is not a fleeting fancy. If I wished for scandal or conquest, I could have sought it easily elsewhere. I ask for her hand with sincerity, and if you deny it, then I will defy denial." Lady Margaret's eyes gleamed in the lantern light, cold and calculating. She turned her gaze upon Eleanor, and in that gaze was both accusation and warning. "And what say you, child? Will you dishonor your father's memory by indulging in this madness? Or will you come to your senses and end this farce before it destroys you?" Eleanor's throat tightened, her voice imprisoned by years of silence. Yet in that silence burned a new flame, fragile but fierce. She thought of her father's library, of long days spent forgotten, of whispered cruelties endured without protest. She thought of the Duke's letter, of the words that had lit her heart with hope. Slowly, with trembling defiance, she raised her head. "I will not end it," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "For the first time I have been seen, not as a shadow but as myself. I will not surrender that truth." The air quivered with the weight of her declaration. Lady Margaret's lips parted, her composure cracking for the briefest instant before she masked it with icy disdain. "Foolish girl," she hissed. "You think defiance makes you strong, but you have no idea the storm you invite. Society will tear you apart. And you, your grace, your reputation will not weather such folly unscathed." The Duke stepped forward, his presence commanding, his voice unwavering. "Let them speak, if they must. My life has been one of duty and appearances, yet none of it has filled the void left in my heart. I would rather endure censure with Eleanor at my side than praise without her. Whatever storm awaits, we shall meet it together." The lantern flame flickered, as though uncertain whether to burn brighter or falter. Lady Margaret regarded them in silence, her mind working behind her sharp eyes. At last, she lowered the lantern slightly, her expression a mask of disdainful amusement. "Very well," she said coldly. "Play at love, if you dare. But remember, the world is not so forgiving as a midnight garden. When dawn comes, you will see the ruin you have invited." With that, she turned sharply and vanished into the shadows, her lantern's glow retreating like a serpent curling back into its den. Eleanor exhaled shakily, the strength she had summoned draining from her in a wave. She clung to the Duke's hand, her body trembling as the enormity of what had transpired settled upon her. "She will not yield," she whispered. "She will twist every word, every glance, until I am ruined in her grasp." The Duke lifted her hand to his lips, his eyes burning with fierce determination. "Then let us not linger in fear. Tomorrow I shall call openly. Let her twist what she may, but I will stand before her and declare my intent in the light of day. She may command whispers, but I command my name, my fortune, and my will. With those I shall shield you." Tears blurred Eleanor's vision, not of sorrow but of fragile hope. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. For so long she had been voiceless, unseen, bound by chains of silence. Now, though fear pressed heavily upon her, she felt the stirrings of a strength she had never known. The night deepened around them, the fountain's water whispering its endless song. They lingered in silence, bound not by secrecy but by a shared vow. At last, he escorted her to the edge of the garden, where shadows concealed his waiting horse. He pressed her hand once more, his gaze steady. "Be ready, Eleanor. Tomorrow begins not with concealment, but with truth." She watched him ride into the night, the sound of hooves fading into the darkness. Alone, she returned to the manor, her cloak heavy with rain and her heart heavy with expectation. Lady Margaret's warning echoed in her ears, yet so too did the Duke's promise. The two forces warred within her, fear and hope, shadow and light, until she could no longer tell which would prevail. In her chamber, she placed the letter once more beneath her pillow, as though its words might guard her through the night. She lay awake long after the house fell silent, her mind restless with images of tomorrow. Her stepmother's wrath, society's censure, the Duke's unwavering gaze. The future loomed uncertain, its path perilous, yet for the first time Eleanor did not shrink from it. She closed her eyes, whispering into the darkness words that felt both prayer and declaration. "I will not be silent." Outside, the first hints of dawn stirred against the horizon, pale light creeping into the edges of the world. The storm Lady Margaret had promised was surely coming, yet so too was the day the Duke had vowed. And as the house slept, Eleanor Harcourt lay awake, waiting for the moment when shadows would yield to truth, and the battle for her future would truly begin.